Hello, today I would like to go over a really fun activity that you can utilize with your alternately assessed students when you're working on the Math Essential Element 3OA.9, which is identifying arithmetic patterns. And one way I like to have an activity with my students is by having them log into Kahoot. Now, Kahoot is a web-based program. They don't need a special app. They don't have to download anything for it. They would simply just type in Kahoot it, and when you click on play over here, it'll create a special game pin, and then your students can go in and they can type in that pin. It's usually just some numbers, and then they add their name and they're ready to go. And what you'll see on your board, what you can share your screen with your students when you're in the virtual classroom, is you'll see the question pop up. It'll have a little countdown and you can read that question out to your students. So I think it's a really awesome feature. I really like Kahoot because you can utilize this as a formative assessment, right? You can also present it as a pre and post assessment. You can utilize it as an entry slip where you have your students complete or play the Kahoot at the beginning of the lesson, go through your actual lesson, and have them replay it as an exit slip. And then you can compare and contrast the questions and the data between the pre and the post assessment. And what's even better is the students are playing a game, they're having fun, and then you get some data. Now, what's awesome about Kahoot is whatever email that you sign in with after you play the game, it will email you a data report. You'll be able to identify which students got which answers correct and incorrect. So you have data sent right to you, which is fantastic. There's nothing you have to do other than playing a game and having some fun with your students. So I want to go over how I utilize this for math, and I'm going to go into the edit mode, and I'm going to show you how I broke this down for my students, how I was able to provide some questions for them, and the way I went about providing those questions. So as you can see, when you create a question, since we're in edit mode, here are all your options that you have for you. Everything I utilized with this Kahoot is completely free. If you see a little crown down here, an orange crown, that means that's that premium version, so you would have to pay for that. So those are options that aren't available for us. So totally up to you guys. Like I said, I've always used the free version. My students love it. It's fantastic. So I would give that a go and give it a shot. So when you're over here, you'll see you have a time limit. You can set a time limit for each question. You can change the time limit on each of the questions within a single Kahoot. It doesn't have to be one option for every single question. So if you have a harder question, you can give your students some more time. If there's a really easy question, you can give them some less time. Totally up to you. You can totally modify that and differentiate it for your students and your learners. So you'll see it's anywhere between 5 seconds and 4 minutes. Pretty big. I typically use anywhere between the 30 seconds and the 2 minutes, right? Based on how wordy the problem is, what they're working on. So just some options, right? And so you'll see here, I started off with, since we're working on arithmetic patterns, we talk about some operations. And what are some operations you can use to solve a problem? Now, as we go through, I start off my Kahoot oftentimes with a question that has every answer correct. So I want to encourage my students. I want them to be motivated. I want to excite them. And so I kind of give them a freebie. I give them an option to really feel successful when they're starting out the Kahoot. So they have a lot of, they feel really good about themselves and they want to keep going. So here I had every answer marked as correct, and you would just click on this little circle here and that'll mark an answer as correct or not, right? So very simple to do when you want to identify the correct answer. Everything automatically saves, right, as you're going through. I also provided an image here that has a visual support for my students. Since we're talking about the various operations, some of the operations that we had talked about in my class were addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Now, although we're only focusing on addition and subtraction, we have talked about those other operations. So I wanted to give them a choice to pick any one they wanted, right? Whatever they thought caught their eye, and they would be correct. So they'd start off this assessment in a really great place, and that's my goal, right? I want to get the most out of my students, especially when I'm assessing them. Okay, so now as we move along, you can see I asked the question. Now here, this question only has one correct answer, right? So they can't get all them right all the time. So it says, when you see all together, in total, or in all, what operation do you use? Now I provided a visual support for my students, a plus sign, so that they knew we were talking about addition. right? So that's something I wanted to cue my students into paying attention to, because we're focusing on these key words, right? I want them to be able to tell me when they see these key words, I know I'm going to add. Okay, so now let's move along. We worked on subtraction as well. Like I said, we were focusing on addition and subtraction and knowing the difference between the two. And then over here, I have what words will tell you to minus or use subtraction. And so my image that I embedded in my question had a bunch of different choices. And so I wanted my students to be able to reference this visual and identify all the different options, right? So there isn't really only one answer here. There are many answers. So I gave my students the option to pick on any one that stood out to them, that they really liked. And that's why I put in some different choices for them. And they were, again, all marked correct. Now, what I really like about Kahoot as well is when your students are choosing their answers on their device, whether they log in with a laptop or an iPad or a tablet, whatever it is, they won't see the words there. What they'll see 4 boxes if you have 4 answers, and they will have a box with just the shape in between. And what I really like about that is our students who are just learning how to decode, they aren't confused by identifying the word in addition to finding the answer. So you may be able to read this question to them and they may be able to think of an answer, but then they get stuck or caught up in trying to find that answer within a multiple choice. And that's something that Kahoot you don't have to worry about that with this, because they'll have a red box, a blue box, a yellow box, and a green box. So they can very simply go in and match the color to the correct answer that you've shared with them. You can read out, right? As you're sharing your screen and you see this, you can read exactly like I did to you what words tell you to use minus or subtraction, or what words tell you to minus or use subtraction. And then I could say, is it less, gave away, difference, or left over? So now I've read it to them, so as I'm reading it to them, they can identify which answer they want to choose, and using their device, just click on that answer. And you get immediate feedback as soon as your students are finished. You will see a bar graph of your class on who chose what answer. So if there are 4 options, you'll have 4 bars, and you'll see where your students kind of fell, right? So that's really great information for you as well to see if they get stuck on something, right? Did the majority of your students get it? Did 80% or more get it? Is it something you need to revisit and work on a little bit better, right? So again, a lot of feedback, not only from your students' answers, but for you to then use and be able to modify your own teaching. So then we went into cubes and we talked about the strategy that we utilize when we're solving word problems, and I had them identify it, again with a visual prompt, right, to help them cue into what it is I wanted them to identify. And then we went into each of the steps of cubes, and I wanted them to tell me each of the steps. What the C stands for, circle. What the U stands for, I have a picture of some underlines there, right? Then I had what the B stands for, which is boxing that keyword, which we already identified in the beginning, right? When we were talking about those addition keywords and those subtraction keywords. So those are those words that we're boxing, right? To help us identify that operation we're going to use. Then, as you can see here, I have the E, and the E in cubes is a little trickier. It's eliminate. And because that's hard for my students to remember or hard for them to pronounce sometimes, it's a difficult vocabulary word, I only provided 2 options. Instead of having all 4 like my other questions did, I just provided 2. I wanted to give them a 50-50 chance, right? It's a little tricky for them. Not a lot of our word problems always have extra information that they don't need to pay attention to, right? We're not always trying to trick them. But if there is, I still want them to know that. So I just gave them 2 options, and you can see here in any quiz question that you can have up to 4 options, you can have 3 options, or you can just provide 2, right? Where it's a 50-50 chance for your students to get the answer correct. So now I'm going to show you when you go in and add a question. Again, remember to look for the features that are free. Go to your quiz question if you want to have the option to do up to 4 different choices, or you can do a true or false. So let's start with the quiz question with the 4 options. And this is what you'll see when you're creating, right? You have an option to add an image, and then you have to at least add 2 answers, but it's optional to add 3 or 4. Right? You can upload an image, you can take a picture of Boardmaker, right? You can screenshot it, embed it in there if that supports your AAC learners. Also, if you don't want to use true or false and you instead want to type in vocabulary that your students might be more familiar with, you can go in and check a yes or a no. Right? If maybe they're not familiar with true false, we don't want to throw that into an assessment unless we're working on it. So use yes and no, and it's still just like a true or false, right? And again, your other option, if you know that your students know true false, it just pops up right for you. You can click right on it, type in your question, add an image to support it, and there you go. So I hope that you have fun using Kahoot, and I hope your students can use it and have a great time going through an assessment in a really fun game based way.